And there's a quote that I wanted to read from an environmental thinker, David Orr. He says, "Hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. Hopeful people are actively engaged in defying the odds or changing the odds. Optimism leans back, puts its feet up, and wears a confident look."
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to the Imperfects, our very own psychologist! Oh, it's exciting.
Could we add a lyric to our very own psychologist?
Yeah.
Our very own best-selling, and the book still isn't even out yet, psychologist?
Yes, we'll find a quicker way to say it.
I'm holding the book up to the camera now.
Okay, we're jumping right into it. Right into it. So Dr. M is back.
Uh-huh.
This is so exciting, Em. And as Hugh has pointed
Wasted
out,
no time getting into it. What's making her nervous? She's not comfortable
I know, it does
with the
make me
promotion,
nervous.
so I want to
Yeah.
get it over and done with because, Em's not into promotion of herself, but we are into promotion of Em. The book is called Unstuck.
She's all of a sudden on a television show, holding the book up like he's Jay Leno. Very lucky to have Dr. Emily, a psychologist with a brand new book, Unstuck.
Emily, how are you?
Oh, the American accent, a great touch. Please do one more paragraph in American accent.
We are so grateful to have Dr. Emily Musgrove from Melbourne, Australia,
It's really good.
on the couch. Emily, welcome to the US. How are you?
Okay,
Very
yes.
disarmed.
So where can people get the book
Yep.
now?
I should have a spiel for this. It's available for pre-order online at Penguin and through all good book retailers.
Yes.
It's out on the 20th of May.
The bad ones too, they'll have it, I'm
Correct.
sure.
Yep. And I have to emphasise that, yes, I am narrating the book, and I have had a lot of people asking whether that is the case for the audiobook.
Essential.
So you'll hear my
That
dulcet
is-
tones for a long time.
That's going to be great.
Have you done it yet? Have you done the narration?
No,
Okay.
in a couple of weeks.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm 123 pages in, and it's made me cry a
Are
lot.
you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Where'd you get that? It's not even out yet.
Have my words. Well, Emily gave it to me. Dr. M gave it to me.
Oh, it's cool, Em.
yeah.
I'm cool. I'm cool. I don't need it. I've been reading heaps of books. Still getting through Tolkien. But yeah, I'll definitely jump on yours next. Definitely jump on yours next when I get it. I'll pre-order it. I'll pay for it like everyone else. Like a plan, but cool. No, genuinely so exciting, Em.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So it's called Unstuck. What is it about? Like,
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
sort of focus of the
Yeah.
book?
So I guess when I was thinking about what would be helpful and useful for people, like as a self-help genre, one of the things that I've come across, like in the time working as a psychologist, is that very rarely do I work really exclusively with a diagnosis. What I would work with is what the problem is that is here in this moment, or that what brings people to therapy. And so what brings people to therapy is most often that they are stuck in pain. And so the book really is around how we become unstuck from the struggle that we're in at the moment. So it could be unstuck from making decisions. It could be unstuck from relationships. It could be unstuck in patterns of thinking, of ways of working with emotions.
So like super practical. It
it's
sounds.
really practical. I hope it's very hopeful.
Mm.
I genuinely have a very strong belief, and I think that this hopefully comes across in the podcast too, and that is that there is always a space for choice in there. It's just how we uncover it. And I think it's with this choice that we then can really move forwards. And so that's kind of the premise of this book, is that we zoom in and we have a look what's here, and then we work out how we can move forward with this new kind of in-depth awareness of our experience and the actions that we're currently taking to manage them.
Whoa.
It's
Cannot
beautiful.
wait to buy my book full retail price from a good retailer. Cannot wait.
In Emily's defence, my copy is printed out on A4 pages, not even stapled, just with a rubber band around them. So
Amazing.
I would add to that the book is also I think what a lot of people would really like is the experience of just listening to Em without three guys interrupting her and asking silly questions.
Actually, that might keep me away. It might deter me, but yeah, I'll give it a go.
But it's also, I think you make the really nice observation that so many of us at certain points of our lives feel broken, and you point out that we're not broken, we're just stuck. Yeah. And you give so many beautiful stories of people in therapy who have come to you stuck, and then you finish the book with all this practical advice on how we can become unstuck, and it's it's so beautifully written.
Oh,
So
thank you very much.
123 pages in, not all the way. Congratulations.
Thank you, really. And as I've said to all of you at some point, that I just would not have had this opportunity had you not all trusted me to be on here with you from the very beginning. So, yeah, it's like a mutual love.
It's I'm sure we'll link to it, and I'm sure we'll get a clip of that. So that would be great. Just 5%, 2 to 5% would be great.
Each
of sales.
All
probably have to split it.
Split it. Yeah. Maybe 10 then.
We did play a big part.
Yeah.
We'll work it out. We'll work out details later. But anyway.
Yeah.
Em.
I'm here.
We're back. Mm-hmm. So before we jump straight into hope, which is what you're talking about today, just to quickly point out to everyone, we have traditionally had 8 Dr. M episodes a year for the last few years, or since you started with us.
Yep.
And this year we're up in the ante to 12?
I believe 12, yeah.
We're doing monthly all year round, baby. So that's very exciting for everyone.
Yeah.
So thanks,
I'm very
Em.
excited to be here.
More
That's
Em.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Em, hope.
Yeah.
What do we need to know?
Okay. Well, to begin with, the reason that I wanted to do this particular theme and this particular topic is twofold. The first is that hope and hopefulness is a key foundation to human flourishing. It's a key factor in all of the work that I do as a psychologist is finding and cultivating hope. But the second part of this is also the deep acknowledgement of some very current feelings of despair, of mistrust, of cynicism based upon
worry.
Yeah, and deep fear based upon the current world circumstances. And what is so paramount in this work is that when we lose hope, progress stops.
Yeah.
So do you mean on a global level, like on a large level?
Yeah.
When a group of people, like a population, loses hope collectively?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the same can be said for an individual. When we lose hope, we move into hopelessness and we move into despair.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll get into some definitions and how to work with this, but psychologically, a place of despair is a place of immobility, of non-movement, of freezing. And when we look at all of the research, decades of research around this, like even back to the earlier, kind of probably 1950s, 60s, Martin Seligman looking at the theory of learned helplessness. It's kind of this similar notion that when we lose hope, we stop moving. And from that place of not moving, we lose a will to live. And so it's a very significant risk factor for suicide. It's probably one of the most predictive factors for suicide risk is despair and a loss of hope. When we think about it from a global point of view, if we all lose hope, if we all move into despair and helplessness, what happens next?
Not good things.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. And no. And so
you can quote me on that.
and so it's like this is why this feels so important, and that is that we need to bring awareness to how we're feeling as a community, as a global collective, and we also need to bring awareness to how hope is felt on an individual basis.
Can you explain practically how you do that? Because it's like something you might hear someone in your industry say.
Yes.
But like, what does that practically, how do I do that? What would I do?
Okay. So
is it what you did just before we turned the microphones on without revealing too much? How you talked about how you were feeling?
Yeah, I said I was feeling nervous today.
Yeah.
And it's because I haven't done this since last May, actually, probably.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that the last
Yeah,
time
the
we
last time
recorded?
we recorded was last May. So
Oh
it's
my
been quite a
God.
while.
Mm.
And I was also nervous about the book.
Yeah.
And so I said to you guys before, and it's so interesting, I'll tell you in a second. I said to you, I just have to tell you that I'm feeling really nervous today. And then I kind of named a couple of reasons, and then we joked that we name it to tame it. And I'll get into what that means. But if I was to track my feelings of anxiety right now, they've moved. I've moved with them. And if I was to really tune in right now, they're not really present.
Because you're able to say them, or
I think, yes. And we can look at the research around what's called affect labeling, which is the capacity to be able to label and articulate verbally how we're currently feeling. And that from a brain activity point of view, what happens when we label verbally and put a language to our emotional or internal experience is that it increases activity in the prefrontal cortex. So prefrontal cortex, front part of the brain, it's responsible, amongst many other things, for emotion regulation. Now, when we think about anxiety, for example, or fear, we're getting a really dominant activity in the kind of at the back or the lower parts of the brain, often referred to as the limbic system, part of the threat center. We get big lighting up of activity in that part of the brain. Now, when we bring language on board, it's like the prefrontal cortex dampens down the activity of the limbic system or the threat center. So it's kind of like when we bring language, we're dampening down the threat response.
Awesome.
And in addition, we're also bringing meaning to our experience. So I can now start to make meaning of the fact that I was feeling nervous. And it's as though it can now sit out here rather than pushing me around internally. Yeah. So yes, that is certainly a big component when it comes to working with and cultivating hope. That's one strategy which we'll look at. Before we get there, I think it might be really useful to get a sense of some definitions, because hope, I think, is a term that we use theoretically speaking, technically speaking, often incorrectly. And so I think it might be useful even if we just start with what hope means. So one of the most prominent, I guess, theoretical conceptualizations of hope comes from Rick Snyder's theory of hope, or hope theory, which I think was developed around 1999, early 2000s. And the title of one of his research articles, which I think is just so beautiful, is that hope is like the rainbows of the mind.
That's really cool.
And like even as you sit with that image, what do you notice that brings up?
I just saw a unicorn dancing through my brain. Because of the rainbow. They're like synonymous for some reason.
Yeah.
It sort of feels childlike.
I just think of colour, and I know from my own personal experience, but anecdotally for me, I feel like when I'm not doing well, the first thing, well, not so much the first, I think the first thing to present itself is low mood and sort of depressive thoughts. But I think when to use the phrase used before, sit with it and kind of listen to what's going on, the thing I think that really gets me is that hope disappears. And I think the absence of hope is more damaging than the presence of the depressing feelings. Yeah. And I've often felt like I genuinely can't see colour as well. Like just literally can't see colour as well when I'm in that mood. Yeah. And so the rainbow to me is like, because I know the feeling of coming out of that mood often is accompanied through light and being able to see colour or plants or nature more vividly and appreciate them again. And it comes with a feeling of hope coming back. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful image, really. It's interesting too that you say that it's the hope. It's actually the absence of hope more than the depressive symptoms that is more significant, and the research would absolutely back that up.
Right. Okay.
It's a much greater predictor, the lack of hope for suicide than depressive symptoms. And what is particularly interesting about hope theory, or Snyder's hope theory, is that hope is not an emotion. It's actually a belief or a cognition. And what is so powerful and paramount to that is that when it's a belief, when it's a cognition, it can be learned and it can be cultivated, as opposed to feeling states or mood states which come and go, which we often have zero control over.
Almost like reacting to them. They kind of wash over us a little bit.
The emotions?
The emotion?
Yeah, they can. I mean, they can.
Okay, yeah, exactly. They can. I don't always do that. Exactly. No, you took the words out of my mouth. You cut me off. Yeah. They don't always do that, but they can. Yeah.
So I'll be a bit more explicit. So from this theory, basically hope consists of a belief in my ability to work towards a desired pathway and destination. Mm. And it involves two main cognitive features, or three actually. The first is goals, having goals. That's the first one. So hope instinctively involves some kind of goal for the future.
And when I think goal, sorry to cut you off, but when I think goal, I immediately think professional goal. But I'm assuming it doesn't have to be a professional.
No, absolutely. Yeah. It could be anything. Like, for example, and we'll get into this too, but it could be something like maybe you have a terminal illness, and a hope might be that there's a cure, and then that hope over time becomes reimagined or recalibrated, and hope now becomes the goal to reach my daughter's birthday. Amazing. For example.
Yeah.
So there is some sort of goal-directed behaviour that is there. And if you think about the rainbow notion, it's that we always think about like the notion of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's almost like we're following this pathway here to some desired outcome, that there's some sort of meaning and purpose at the end there for us. So the first part is the goal. The second part, again, a cognitive feature, is pathways, what's called pathways thinking. And that is that I can see and I can create pathways towards that goal. So it's like looking forward and seeing what obstacles might be there and thinking about how I'm going to get from this present to a desired future.
Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. And then the problem solving to get to that goal.
Yeah. The third part, and this is really integral, because if we don't have this, then hope doesn't manifest itself in the same way. The third part is what's called agency thinking, and that is our motivation and our willingness to follow the pathway. Mm-hmm. So we could, for example, see that there is, let's just say we have a hopefulness of getting a new job. And I can see that the pathway is I go and update my CV and then I put my applications in to this job. But if I'm lacking in the agency, my belief in my ability to act on this, then hopefulness can't exist.
Mm. Oh, can you explain that? So you mean your agency is in like your control of it, or your...
So my motivation.
Your motivation.
My energy and my willpower. So what is like propelling me into action.
Gotcha.
So there is an inherent action component to hopefulness and to hope. And that's where it differentiates itself from optimism, because I think the two are often conflated.
Definitely.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I would find it hard to separate the two.
Yeah. So there's lots of varying understandings and theoretical underpinnings to both of these concepts, I want to be clear. And this is just kind of the way that I would work and one part. But optimism has often been viewed as, like, even for example, as a trait. This may not be a surprise to you. I'm very optimistic. I'm a very optimistic person. Yep. And I also find hopefulness to be something that I can really enact as well. Mm-hmm. So optimism basically is the belief that a good outcome will happen. Okay?
Yep.
By contrast, hope is the belief that a good outcome could happen.
Oh.
Right? So optimism.
Hence the kind of blind optimism.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So optimism does not involve action. It's just a belief that good things will happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there are big problems with that, which we can come to. Hope is very different. Hope inherently involves uncertainty. I don't know if this is possible for me, but I hope that it is, and that is supported by my actions, by my motivation and my willpower.
Mm-hmm. So if you don't have all three of that, almost like the three legs of a stool or something, hope collapses?
Yeah, we could technically say that.
Yeah, maybe that's not the right word to use, but I'm thinking of to a very specific example in my life of like wanting to be, I'll say it, wanting to lose weight, even though I don't like thinking those terms and admitting it, but it's true for me. I know what the goal is. I know what I need to do to get there, but I don't have the internal motivation or agency to do it. And therefore, I don't have much hope that I'll ever change.
So it moves into helplessness.
Yeah, in that specific area. Yeah.
So you can see in that example, and I know there's a lot of pain in there with that, Josh, that that the absence of that kind of belief in your agency also then brings you into a lot of internal dialogue and negative criticism.
Yeah.
Which then kind of puts us into a negative spiral. Of less hopefulness.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably the first time anyone has ever been able to explain to me why it is that when I start to exercise, it feels worse.
Yeah.
You just got unstuck. What date?
She's good. She's good. No, that I'd never really thought of it that way. But that's that feels very true to the experience. Yeah.
There's something really powerful about the agency.
Yeah.
I want to be careful around the word of willpower because I think it can also trip us up a lot too. And I think what happens is that it can move us into blaming and shaming.
Yeah.
And so there is a reluctance on my part to use it as like this term that we have, the willpower, as though it's something that is superior. But really it's talking about my belief in my ability to do it.
Yeah.
And that what comes with that is a motivation.
Yes. Yeah.
This is kind of coming back to, again, this kind of action-oriented notion of hope. And there's a quote that I wanted to read from an environmental thinker, David Orr. And hope plays a very, very big part in our understanding of climate change and what's being done to address that incredibly large and ominous issue. And he writes, as do many others, that hope is so integral to us changing the future and changing a projected outcome. And I like the way he differentiates hope from optimism. And so I might read it to you. He says, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. Hopeful people are actively engaged in defying the odds or changing the odds. Optimism leans back, puts its feet up, and wears a confident look.
So good. So good.
Yeah.
I feel like the analogy of hope having its sleeves rolled up is all you need to know.
Yeah.
It's great. It's so good.
I think it really is around the fact that hopefulness absolutely involves action. And that's something we have a choice over. Now, what's interesting, if we look at that kind of collective experience of hopefulness, and in the current climate, this being a particularly strong issue, is the very natural and very understandable vulnerability towards feeling mistrusting and very cynical. And if we look at the research around cynicism, we could say, in fact, the research suggests that if you were to survey people about their views of someone that is cynical and ask them whether they think that cynical people have a greater intelligence or cognitive capacity and whether they're more socially intelligent, most people will say that cynics are more intelligent and have more social intelligence. Do you have a sense of why that might be?
Maybe you feel like they're more intelligent, but you wouldn't want to have a piccolo with them or any coffee.
I think that is absolutely spot on.
He's a piccolo man.
I was going to say beer, but I don't drink beer anymore. So
I think it's easier to be quick-witted and fast-speaking and dominate an intellectual argument if all you're doing is tearing something down.
Yeah.
So therefore you come across as more intelligent, but I actually think it requires more intelligence to build something or create something than tear other things down, which I think is inherently cynical.
Yeah.
So I think I can see how it appears more intelligent, but I feel like it's not. Yeah, I don't know if that's helped at all.
Well, I think, that's actually correct. And there's some really awesome work by Dr. Jamil Zaki, and he also does some really great podcasts too. And he talks about the notion of cynicism And in contrast to cynicism, the idea of hopeful scepticism, particularly when it comes to this kind of collective community hopefulness. But he, in his work, discovered that when surveying people, that most people believe that cynics are more intelligent and they have more social intelligence. And in fact, the opposite is actually true.
Like proven.
Yeah. Yeah. So the opposite is true.
That.
And that is that. And,
Is he satisfied?
and I'll explain why. So if you hold a very cynical view, and I want to emphasize also, and I'll say this up front, it is very, very understandable, again, in the current world that you may genuinely feel a sense of cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
It's very well placed to feel that.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at its utility, we're going to encounter some problems. So I really want to validate it is absolutely normal and understandable that you might be feeling cynical about the goodness of humanity, for example. But as a cynic, what happens is we bring a lens through which we view the world with negativity and threat. So as a cynic, I sit back here and I'm moving away from my friend, and I'm scanning the environment for threat-based cues. Now, what we know, like across so many different experiences for individuals and for collective groups, is that the more focused we are on threat, the more likely we will see it and the more likely we'll experience it in even the benign behaviour of others.
Oh, so it's almost like we attract it.
Exactly. So if I go in expecting for you to be dismissive or rude or for you to not help me, then for example, my body language going in, my tone of voice as I'm speaking to you, the way I might express something, so I might maybe even be more blunt or more demanding or more defensive. All of those micro behaviours, in addition to where my attention is being placed, is going to make it more likely that this turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And also, that, but I feel like you were talking to Ryan hypothetically then, like if you're looking for threats from Ryan, you're more likely to act in that way to him. But I feel like to everything that happens around you, not just to Ryan. So
absolutely,
anyone else in your world who maybe has the best of intentions or whatever is still going to get caught up in that.
Yeah. And so it can be a lens through which we are viewing the world and our experience in it. And then we just get confirmation that this is true. And we get confirmation that I shouldn't have high expectations of people. I should lower my expectations because I don't have faith in humanity. I don't have faith in the goodness of people. And what happens then when we're cynical is that we stop taking action and we move again, quite potentially, into despair, or sometimes we can move into that kind of like more aggressive hating space. And we see this all the time on social media.
I feel like it's getting worse too in social online.
Yes, and that is such a key point there, and that is that it's actually online is not representing the actual goodness in humans, right? So we begin through exposure to social media and media in general, journalism as well, is that we're actually getting a very thin slice of the world. But that thin slice is taking over our whole perception of what's currently happening. And it's as though like the intel we're getting is not accurate.
Yeah,
and that's us who knows life without social media.
Yes.
Then there's the whole generation of people who don't know life without it, and that is their world.
Yeah. And so if we're only gathering information from these sources, then I think it certainly adds such a vulnerability to us feeling cynical and hopeless and despairing.
I love the way you say the thin slice, because I feel like it's the way you talked about it is like a thin slice that then gets stretched out across your entire 24 hours of your day. Because I often hear people talk about it like saying it's not real or it's just one aspect, but then you think about the amount of time, especially younger people, but people are immersed in it. It is very real to them. Yeah. But it's such a beautiful way of saying it that it's like one thin slice of the human condition that then gets stretched out over everything. Yeah.
And it begins to colour our sense that we have capacity to change, and we have within us this ability to, like, if we slow down enough and look at our experiences like a curious scientist, so that can bring a skepticism, but is not layering it on with threat and disillusionment and anger and hatred. So there was some interesting research that Dr. Zaki did around the notion of trust. And like, as you can imagine, our trust in institutions, in the government, in the media has plummeted.
Sky high. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is interesting is that trust and hope tends to track experiences of inequality. So when there are big when there's big exposure to inequality and discrimination, for example, which is what we're definitely being exposed to and what people are genuinely experiencing in the current world, is that the more cynical we will begin to feel. So it tracks inequality. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It does.
Yep. Okay. So when Dr. Zaki asked about trust, there was this broad question that was for US respondents, and it was, do you think you can trust most people? And 30% of respondents said yes, but 70% said no, we cannot trust most people. But then the question was, when you zoom down and you ask, can you trust people in your local community and your neighbours? The response doubled.
Mm.
So the response of yes doubled.
Mm.
So
That's interesting.
well, it's really important, because when we come down to what is within our control is how we are showing up in our individual lives and in our communities, and we can see people passing by and we can have engagements with them, we notice that these are just average people, that they're not megalomaniacs and narcissists. And, I don't want to be too transparent about what I'm saying here, but when we zoom in and look at what is in our current environment, in our local community, we actually notice that trust is pretty good, that we can actually trust most people when it's within our local communities and our neighbourhoods.
It's funny, isn't it, that thing of, I've always been really bad at getting to know my neighbours, like around where I live. It's just not something that was a big part of growing up, and it's just not a big part of my life now. But recently, there's this one woman, and she's got a couple of kids, and she lives a few doors down. And when I see her and I speak to her, there's like a real sense of like warmth to this person just because she lives close.
Yeah. Yes.
Like I don't really know anything about her.
Yeah.
Except for like the 3 quick conversations that I've had with her in the street. But the sense that she's like the buildings are connected by a few, by like 20 meters or something. Yeah. It's, I don't know. It's just like, it's really nice to see her.
Yeah.
It's so weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Why is that?
Well, I think we're all craving, we're all yearning for a sense of belonging and a sense of community. And it's just not felt in the same way online. Like, for example, our nervous systems regulating with each other, like that I can pick up how you're feeling and you can pick up how I'm feeling. I can notice your body language. I can read more. I've got more cues to take in when I'm with you. And so, yes, I have very strong beliefs around the importance of face-to-face contact. And the research obviously very much is in line with that. And this is also kind of, if we come full circle, it's coming back to, so a collective hopefulness is how we start in our communities rather than looking at the broader picture which feels so dire. Because if we look at that dire picture, we will feel despair and it will feel like nothing has changed or that we're regressing in some way. So if we just to look for a second at this kind of collective hopefulness, and then we'll move on to the individual because that's particularly important. But one of the ways in which we can start to almost like facilitate and cultivate this greater faith in humanity that we will get through and that we will be able to cultivate and create a life that is worth living and a life that is approaching these adversities in a way that's helpful. So there's a number of things that we can do there. The first is having an attunement to your own internal experience and to be able to notice and name what is here. So I'm noticing I feel a deep grief. This is the first thing, is that when hopefulness is being threatened and helplessness and hopelessness is is like really at the fore, is to deeply acknowledge that there is a loss here. And this is particularly the case for things like climate change, is the grief. And this might sound big, but there's a grief for the planet. But if we keep our heads in the sand and we deny that this is here, or we get fused with anger and rage, we actually don't move towards action.
There's no progress.
There's no progress. And so this first part here, and this does apply with individuals very, very much, is being able to acknowledge the truth that is here. So that requires us to zoom out from the social media that we're consuming and to really bring a curious lens to what is this truth that's here. Can we have a whole picture perspective of the facts? Now, I could reel off a whole lot of very optimistic and very hopeful stats around how much the world has changed, particularly, and how it's progressed. But I know that that actually could also feel like it's being naive. But even just little small things that you can notice. Like, for example, the other day I was watching the first Bridget Jones' Diary. And this will be the same for any early 2000s or even like well beyond that kinds of movies. And in the movie, like there are very, very obvious and alarming attitudes towards women. So I was 18, 19 in the early 2000s, that we had brought no attention to whatsoever. It was just status quo that this is how women were treated.
Is it as bad as Never Been Kissed?
I haven't seen it.
Drew Barrymore, in her late 20s, admits that she's never kissed someone as a journalist. So her boss sends her undercover to school, so she's a schoolgirl undercover. She then has a crush on a boy at school as a 28-year-old and starts dating him. But then a teacher, falls in love with her.
Thinking she's a
student.
Oh, God.
And then he gets angry
Yeah.
at her at the formal because she's into this kid she's dating. Then she reveals that she's an undercover journalist as a teacher, and then the teacher gets angry at her again.
Teacher loses interest.
Well, he says, "How dare you? I fell in love with you as a student, and now I'm finding out that you're
betrayed that you're an adult."
Yeah,
That is.
Yeah.
Wow.
that's
Yeah.
actually yeah.
But I
Sorry.
think that's so representative of the fact that we can also really lose sight of actually what has changed and how we've progressed. And it feels really disarming when you do get exposed to 20 years ago, this is how we were living in the world. Even statistically, if we look at life expectancies, if we look at science, medicine, if we look at even obviously all the science that's going into climate change, we have come an enormous way, and that we have come from is hopefulness and action.
That's brought along that change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I agree with you. And I think about it quite a bit. And I think about it when I see people in the specific area of sort of healthcare being very angry and questioning medical authorities and stuff. And I think, yes, they've made mistakes over the years, but you're ignoring all the things they've gotten right and not looking at the ledger equally.
Yeah.
But I imagine for a lot of people, what you just said would be a very challenging thing to hear because they see every day mistakes or even regressions on some social issues, in some places. So for people who, and I probably count myself in this batch that get distracted by the bright, shining, awful lights of bad things happening, how do you train yourself to look for the good things? And am I being naive to hold on to those things and what do I do with the bad stuff? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a really, really important point. We have to have both, and we have to hold on in some ways to both. And I'll explain what I mean by that, and that is that we do not want to deny or ignore or push away the suffering that is here. And if we don't witness it, if we are not witness to the suffering that is happening both in our local communities and also in the world, then no action will happen. So, and this is where I'm coming to this kind of acknowledgement of the truth, is being able to bring a lens of it, again, this kind of curious scientist, that we can step back and really check what our intel is. And also then when we can see, and I mean, we all know what's happening in the world, and it's deeply devastating. But if we turn away from it, again, nothing happens. And so in that space of seeing what is here, we have to also acknowledge and grieve the loss that is here for a future that we may have hoped for. And so that's doing some acceptance work, and from the way in which I would work would be really slowing down and being able to open to what's here, and to give it space and to honour it, and then to bring in some compassion for the suffering that we're encountering. So this first bit is acknowledging the truthfulness of this experience. We do not, and I do not want to be sitting here naively saying, like, don't worry about that. It's not about that. We have to acknowledge the suffering that's here, and then we recalibrate. So then it's, let's reimagine what hope looks like. Let's reimagine and reorient ourselves to what is a possibility. And so that is going to come back then into action and goals.
The image that has been like screaming at me in my head this whole time is, it makes so much more sense to me now, knowing what hope is and what it means to people and how important it is. But it makes so much sense that Obama used it as his like first campaign word. It was just like huge post. All it said was hope. And I think at the time I was like, yeah, hope. But clearly that was like well researched and very intentional.
Like it didn't say optimistic.
Yes.
Exactly. It was very
Yeah.
much intentional, obviously.
Yeah.
The other part of this that I think that we really need to be very acute to or aware of is that there is enormous vulnerability in hoping for something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because being hopeful exposes us to uncertainty, and it exposes us to like a yearning that we might have for something and the possibility that it won't happen.
Yeah.
Is this sort of adjacent to, this is coming up for me now, adjacent to like the foreboding joy that Brene Brown talks about?
Yeah.
Like I know like I'm always really careful not to hope for something that I really want,
Yes.
particularly out loud,
Yes.
because I'm worried that I'll like jinx it or get disappointed or whatever.
Yes. That's exactly it. It's exactly it, because when you turn the mind to this sense of belief of hope, like that there is a hope that this could happen, it exposes us deeply to the possibility it won't. And that would feel like, on the one end of the scale, it might feel disappointing. On the other end of the scale, it might feel deeply traumatic. And so it is, there's a risk involved in hoping, but the alternative is being cynical and lowering expectations and actively denying a yearning that we might have.
I know speaking from my own perspective, I think there's a real sense of like self-protection in not hoping for something.
Yeah. And my question with that is always, how much does it protect you from disappointment?
No, well, I guess I guess it doesn't ultimately, but for the specific thing, I can't help but think like, but if I just don't hope for it too much, and if it happens, that's great.
Yeah.
But if I'm out there if I'm out there telling people, I really hope that, I win an award or whatever, I really hope. And if I'm telling people that and I'm making that known, then it's like, well, I do really hope for it, like as an example, but if I keep saying it, I'm going to be really embarrassed if it doesn't happen.
I also think built into that, when talking about the way you defined hope earlier, that there's an action sort of plan.
Yeah.
I think it's also for me, the idea that I put myself out there and was wrong. Like the plan was wrong, or like I committed. Yeah.
You didn't do it right.
Yeah.
Or you failed.
I failed.
Yeah.
Not that, because it feels like it has to be paired with that plan of action that I've come up with.
Yes. Yeah.
I was wrong, and the fear of being just wrong, I guess. But but to answer your question before, I guess if you don't have any hope and you're cynical, then you never get there anyway.
Exactly.
So the outcomes the outcome's going to be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing that I want to mention, or really kind of pay attention to, whenever we're talking about hope, is really deeply acknowledging the complicated grief and the despair that comes also with losing someone through suicide. So whether this is losing a child or losing a friend or a partner, and really acknowledging, how we find hopefulness in a place of such great sorrow and despair, knowing also that that person that you loved so deeply had lost hope. So I just really want to pay attention there to how hard this might feel and how challenging this might feel to be listening to this today.
Yeah.
Perhaps thinking about your loved one and wondering how it was that they felt so hopeless, that was the action that was taken. We do know that the research tells us that experiencing the loss of someone through suicide is also a risk factor for your own increased vulnerability towards suicide as well. It's profoundly impactful, and it absolutely erodes our hopefulness. And I want to be really clear that when we think about moving into hopelessness, this is not an attribution of blame as though we can choose to be hopeful or not to be hopeful. I want to be very, very clear about that. It is not a choice we're making to lose hope. Our circumstances, the lives we've experienced, the trauma we've faced is leading us to a place where it feels very hard to be alive. And the work that we do, as therapists, and the work that we do as friends and parents is being able to very gently and very slowly find a way of one small slither of moving forward with one step. And so again, I want to emphasize that this can feel very, very challenging if you're hearing this and you've had your own experience of losing someone to suicide. Equally, losing someone in general, finding hopefulness can feel nearly impossible. And so, I think for a start, we have to, as I've mentioned before, we really have to pay attention to grieving and accepting the loss and finding a way to make sense of this loss, to make meaning of this person's life. And then this question that always shows up for me in the face of great adversity and great loss and challenge is, what is it that I want to stand for in the face of this loss? I can't change what's happened. I can grieve what's here, but what do I want to stand for now? And that, I think, can open us up to something that is in my control.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I've been trying to work out the right time to bring this up. I do this thing every single night before I go to sleep in bed. I never knew what it was, but now I think it's probably linked to hope. But
He's had the birds and the bees chat.
Just worked it out.
It's an interesting time to bring it up, but go on. We all know about it, but yeah, go on. It'll be interesting to hear your take.
every night.
Still haven't worked it out.
This weird thing happens.
So before I go to sleep and I'm lying there, just before I start dozing, I imagine 2 or 3 things that I would love to happen. I imagine them happening and what it would feel like. And the 3 things that keep happening to me, they're 3 goals that I have.
You intentionally think about it, like you choose to think about it.
Yeah, it's a nice way to fall asleep.
Whoa.
So, for example, and this is like a very trivial one.
God, you are so the Resilience Project sometimes.
Yeah, you sure are.
Sometimes I'm like, seriously? You actually do that? Wow.
But I bring this up because I would love people to try it. So it's a lovely way to fall asleep. But this will sound trivial after what we've just talked about, but it's at a personal level. So I have a goal of running the 400 meters under 52 seconds. Mm-hmm. And I imagine as I'm falling asleep what it would feel like to do that. I just imagine it and just think, gosh, imagine you could run that fast. And I've had that goal for the last 3 years and I've gone close, but I haven't yet done it. But it's driven my behavior, which is to train really, really hard in hope that would happen. Yeah. Hasn't happened yet. Like I've failed every Saturday in summer for the last more than that, for 5 years now. I've failed every single Saturday of summer. I don't get there, but I don't feel like a failure at all. It's just that it's that hopeful thought has driven really positive behaviour. Yeah. There's another one that I think about on a much deeper level. Again, it's about our family, and it will make a lot more sense in a week's time when another episode comes out about some stuff our family's going through. But I imagine one of our kids as a young adult thriving in the world, and that feels like it's a long way off, both, you know, from a time point of view, but also the way they're going at the moment. I just imagine them thriving in the world as I fall asleep. It's a very hopeful thought, but it inspires. The thought is so wonderful on both counts, but probably more the second one. The thought is so wonderful that it inspires the hard work that has to get done to get there. It inspires it every single day, and it drives it. And it's, but it's another appointment. Yes, it's another issue to deal with, or it's another, but you do it because the thought every night of it, you know what it feels like. Well, you don't exactly know, but you imagine it before you go to sleep. So I don't know, like, that's just a practical thing that I wasn't go to bed going, right, time to practice hopeful, but it's that's just what I've done.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's also so incredibly spot on with the way that we work with hope. Because part of this is opening up the mind to imagining a better future. And that's something that we will actively avoid doing. And now this is not certainly about like manifesting. I want to be clear that this is not woo-woo. And I don't want to woo, oh God, I don't want to woo-woo manifesting either.
You don't want to woo-woo.
Have the manifestors coming for me. No, what I'm, from an evidence-based point of view is that there is something so powerful about us turning our mind to the possibility and to envisaging it as an outcome. Because you're absolutely right. It drives our action and it inspires us, like you said. It's a very vulnerable thing to do, but it also deeply reflects usually our values and this valued direction that we want to head in. If you were to ask any elite athlete, being able to imagine themselves winning a race, then envisaging and imagining and viewing themselves in those moments is a very, very common practice. Now, again, this is not about being unrealistic. So we need to actually think about when we're looking at hopefulness, what is within our capacity and what is within our environment and our resources. Now, for me to hope for something like, I don't know, to hope to win the lotto, I mean, that's actually a wish for a start. That's just a wish. There's nothing I can do aside from buying a ticket. There's nothing I can do towards that. Equally, I can't hope to live to 1,000 because it's not actually reasonable or possible, right? So we need to make sure that when we're thinking about hope is that that there is a possibility in there that this can happen.
I think for me, that's where it's scary to hope.
Exactly.
It's scary to hope for the things that you can make happen.
Yes.
Because I think it, like what I was saying before, but also what Josh was saying about the fear of failing to do it.
And now it doesn't protect you from failing. So when failure or when an outcome happens that is undesirable and it's not what we're hoping for, then this is, again, like such an important moment to slow down and to give ourselves some grace and compassion for the disappointment, for the sadness, for the loss that's here. And then, and once we've been able to do that, whether that's with support from other people or not, is then to realign and to look forward again to what is the next thing I can do? What is my next goal? And usually, and this is particularly the case, for example, when we're looking at palliative care or terminal illness or medical diagnoses, and that is that at the start of a diagnosis, you might hope for cure. And then as time goes on and things unfold, then our pathways of hope change. But hope is so instrumental to the quality of life of that person. So we then recalibrate and we look at what is the new pathway of hope here? What is it that I'm almost like, again, like checking in with our values, like where is this valued direction? And I hope to be able to show up to the family that I love and to let them know that I love them and I care for them. So the pathway changes. It doesn't have to cling on to the one outcome that we originally started with.
Unstuck. I'm unstuck. That got me. I think that I think I get it. I get it now. I didn't really understand, but I think that example of the quality of life on the pathway to the thing you're hoping for, that's the kind of like process over product sort of theory as well, where it's like journey, not destination, and make sure that if hope really is, which it clearly is, improving the quality of life and our general mental well-being, then why not? Why not hope if it's going to make the journey, the quality of the journey that much better? Because often the destination is something that's sometimes out of your control anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you mentioned, and this is a lot more trivial than what you were talking about then, with terminal illness, but to go back to a much more, I guess, black and white example of the athlete that imagines a hopeful outcome of winning, say, a gold medal at the Olympics. I immediately thought of all the athletes that had imagined it and lost and didn't win. But as you were talking then, it seems to me that of course, like if you hope and imagine winning an Olympic medal in 4 years' time and you work towards it for 4 years and you don't win, I'm sure I'd have to ask athletes, but I'm sure there are some that it's absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
But I guess in the long term, you've lived your life the way you wanted to for the last 4 years to get there.
Yes.
And
performed a hell of a lot better because of that hope.
But yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't have any regret about hoping.
Yeah. You may actually have regret because you may, in the moment of feeling so deeply upset at the loss, you may like that critic is going to come in and say like, why did you bother hoping?
Yes, yeah. Maybe in the long run.
Yes, in the long run, like when you zoom out, like I'm so proud of myself for the effort rather than the outcome. And hope got you to this place. Now, if we take the example of an elite athlete, if there wasn't hope, if they didn't yearn for, expect this outcome,
have an action plan,
then there would be no action. Like my suspicion is that they would stop, or turn their attention to something else. So hope never protects us from pain, but the pain of staying stuck and staying still is so much more profound.
Yeah,
it's a really complex. It's a really complex notion and concept, and it sometimes feels intangible. You know, I've spoken, I guess, more broadly around this kind of collective idea, and then obviously kind of individually, like how we cultivate more hope. There are a couple of key strategies I wanted to mention to kind of give this a sense that there's something that I can do to really cultivate this. The first one comes back to what's already been a theme here, and that is this idea of social connection and what Dr. Zaki refers to actually as social savouring. And when you look at all the research on awe, Dr. Keltner is a very prominent researcher in this area, and I know Julia Baird's come on and spoken so beautifully about awe. And in the research in terms of awe, one of the biggest predictors of our experience of awe and therefore hopefulness is moral beauty. Now, moral beauty is the beauty that comes from the goodness of people and witnessing that. And so that means, for example, being able to savour and to be present and attuned to an act that someone is doing in your presence that is beautiful, kind or caring. And the thing that is so important in that is that acts of moral beauty, this will make me tearful, acts of moral beauty are most likely to show up for us when we're deep in pain and darkness. Because we experience the kindness of others and we experience a sense that we are not alone. And that feeling that I am not alone is what allows us to keep going. So my, I guess, invitation is to see if you can just keep your eye out and to slow down, to notice like these moments here when people are being good. then people are showing up to you, when people just do things that you never expected them to do. This is quite a small moment, but it's always stuck in my mind. When I was about 23 or 24, I was in
The Bourne Cinema.
it was probably around that time, actually, maybe a little bit later.
Tick.
Yeah.
Got that mentioned in every episode.
I was in I would probably say rather a toxic relationship at that time. And I had made the decision that I was going to go overseas to meet his family. So he wasn't from Australia, and that it was at Christmas time. And that the relationship had been quite distressing and very unhelpful, and that I could go into that, but I won't. And so I made this decision with in retrospect, an optimism that things will be okay and things will work out, and that this would be a good thing for me to do, to go over there for Christmas. But as I was leaving, I knew so deep down in my gut that this was not a relationship I should be in, and that I was leaving my family, my very loving family, for Christmas, which for me is, and for many people, is a particularly important time. And so I said goodbye to my parents, and I'm always very tearful at an airport. And then I got on the plane, and I was sitting on the plane before we'd taken off, and I had kind of like silent tears coming down my face because there was this deep acknowledgement that I shouldn't be in this relationship. And
were you with him?
No, I was meeting him over there. And so I was kind of silently crying there. And then someone 3 rows ahead of me, we still hadn't taken off yet, a man, he might have been in his 60s, perhaps around that age, passed a note to me, and I opened it up. And to be honest, I can't even really remember what it said, but it was something like, it wasn't this, but it was like, "This too shall pass."
Whoa.
And you're not alone. And
oh my God.
Wow.
like in that moment, it was such a small, tiny thing that this person did. But even to this day, like almost 20 years later, they're the moments that tell us,
oh my God,
there's so much goodness here that we can hope for.
I'm going to pre-write some of those notes. That's an incredible thing to do.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
What a hero.
And I didn't speak to him, like we didn't have any discussions. We were on the plane and everyone went off and did their thing. But
I hope he listens to our podcast.
It has always stuck with me. And I think we can really deeply underestimate the power that we have to also cultivate hope for other people. That our small actions can also allow someone to feel really hopeful.
Oh yeah, seeing someone, that's an amazing story. Like I'm sure I can just think of a few times where I've seen strangers do something nice, or it's like a person has clearly stopped to have a conversation and being engaged and interested. And I'm like, what a great person that is. And it just does, and it makes you feel hopeful about moral people and the world. Yeah.
Yeah. And so even you witnessing, and the research is very clear about this too, even you witnessing other people doing kind acts, it like elicits a feeling of hopefulness as well.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Wow.
It can be such a, like that's an incredibly profound moment that you've said, but I feel like I can get that feel almost like a lump in my throat from seeing someone like as simple as like, I don't know, someone's trying to carry like a few boxes into their car and they're struggling and a stranger stops to help them put it in.
Yeah.
Like even that gets me a bit like
Yeah.
I can tear up over that. Like it doesn't have to be a very profound act that I witness or have experienced myself that changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly if I see a kid doing something really nice for another kid, but I can't even imagine if it was your own kid doing something really kind. That would be like an explosion of hopefulness.
Tears.
Yeah. So, you know, social savouring is a really integral part of us being able to really create more hopefulness for us as individuals.
Just on that, I picked Benji up from school the other day and a boy came running out of the classroom, not Benji, and said to me, he said, can Benji and I have a play date? And that's always very like moving as a parent and someone else. And I said, yeah, of course. He said, yeah, because Benji and I have actually become very close recently. It was the most beautiful thing to say.
Yeah.
I mean, it was such a lovely, but coming out of an 8-year-old's mouth, it just.
I want to mention a thing just because I want to make sure we put it in the show notes as a link for people to watch. And I've been trying to work out when to bring it in to the episode. Nick Cave on Colbert on The Late Show, Up Late? No,
the Late Show,
yeah. And Nick Cave has these the red hand files where anyone can write to him and he'll write back to you at some point. I think he's working his way through all of them. And there's a guy who writes in about how he's growing cynical and skeptical of the world, and he's really scared he's going to pass that cynicism on to his son. And Nick Cave's response to that is one of the most beautiful, and he reads it out loud on Colbert, but we could link to the actual letter on the show. His response to that is one of the most incredible pieces of writing I've ever read, and is full of so much of what you've spoken about today. And I just highly recommend people to read it and maybe hear him read it out aloud, because it represents a lot of what you've talked about today. Yeah. And there's a lot of moral beauty in what he
is incredible.
Talks about. Yeah.
I mean, there are so many examples, and I think that this is the thing we also just need to be on the lookout for them. There are many, many things that we could do to cultivate this, but I don't want to have you talking for another 20 hours. There is a really important part that is to do with action taking. So when we think about those three cognitive parts originally from the very beginning of theorizing hope, we've got goals, pathways, and agency. When we set a goal, there's our goal. We then have a pathway so we can see the route that we're going to take. We also have the energy. Now is time for the action. So now is time for the movement. There is a wonderful therapist called Robin Walser. She's an ACT therapist, acceptance and commitment therapy. And she has a beautiful saying, and I use it all the time, and it has a great deal of resonance for me. And that is that in life, we live from the feet up. We live life from the feet up. And what that means is that we move first, and then our head and our heart follow. So in essence, we take action, and then the action creates the feeling. The action creates the belief. Now, in lots of different aspects of psychology, there's the notion of action before motivation, or act better to feel better. It's this idea that nothing changes in stillness. We have to move in order to create and cultivate what we're looking for, rather than waiting for the feeling to then act on it.
Right. Yeah. So you have to sort of do the thing and experience the thing to then understand it or feel it.
Yes.
Okay.
So an example that I might have in therapy could be something like, if we're going to live life from the feet up, we actively shift our feet first in the direction of our values. So it's like a literal turning of the feet to the direction that is important to me. Now, if we use exercise, and I'll use this all the time, it's a very applicable example. It might be something like my values are around health and longevity, being alive so I can care for my kids, for example. And part of that would be a goal to exercise 3 times a week. But I'm coming from a basis of not doing any exercise at all. So for me, and in therapy, is that the goals have to be very, very small. The goal is to put your exercise clothes on and walk to the front door. That is you shifting your feet in the direction. That is you moving your feet, and your head and your heart will follow. Now, you may get to the door and not do it today, but the action and the willingness to do it was you putting the clothes on. And so over time we would see, okay, so I put the clothes on and no, I didn't get there. That's okay. There was a shifting of the feet. There was a willingness there. And then the next day you go out the front door, and then it's walking down 100 metres down the street. So we have to really kind of be very small in our goals initially when things are feeling particularly helpless and hopeless. For anyone that has suffered from depression and a sense of despair, those small movements can feel extremely overwhelming. And so we really need to be checking in with what our capacity is. But that movement needs to happen, otherwise nothing will change.
It may, and this may or may not be contextual to what you're talking about, and I think I've spoken about this at some point on the podcast, but years ago I kind of realized that from a creative point of view, if I wanted to make something, I always had dreams and goals of making a full TV show, or people have dreams of writing a play or making a film or something, like big goals that require lots of things to go right and either money or people to help or whatever. And the thing I kind of realize is like, it's actually, I need to set some really, really achievable goals for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that goal might be making a video on Instagram, or it might be like writing a, I don't know, like 200 word article or whatever. But what I found from doing that was the sort of self-worth, but I guess what it also was hope and belief I got from actually finishing those things was immense.
Yes.
And from finishing even these really small things, because I set it as a goal and then I did it, it's like, I did something.
Yes.
And I think that kind of like helped me build hope within myself, and just like my self-worth went up, and like confidence in my abilities, and I never thought it would come from doing such little things. But whenever anyone makes the foolish decision to ask me for advice when it comes to creativity, I just say, like, set the smallest goal you can think of and just do that and just keep doing small little things. Because it does, for me at least, it did really build my confidence and hope.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that's really reflective of what the research shows us too. And this notion, and I have a feeling it's Dr. Zaki that says this, but it's the same concept, and that is that hope begets hope. So when you complete that, you feel hopeful. It makes you want to hope for more.
Yeah.
It actually makes you, and it's a catalyst for more.
Yeah, because you've shown yourself you can do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's similar to Barbara Fredrickson's upward spiral of happiness and well-being, and that is that the more we do, the more we want, the more we get. That kind of notion that it actually kind of becomes very self-reinforcing. Obviously, the opposite is also true in terms of depression and helplessness and despair as well, is that the more we don't like it, the more we don't want it, the more we look out for danger, the worse it becomes.
Yep.
For me, I think for a lot of people, the act of ending up in a position of handing someone a note on a plane who needs help is such a huge thing. And the idea of doing that is so far outside the remit of requires so much hope and bravery to do something like that. But for me, I've recently, like the first step for me of trying to cultivate hope, and I didn't realize I was doing this, is when I wake up in the morning, rather than opening my phone, I walk out the back door, and that's into our backyard. And that's a difference that I've found has, and a course of action that's motivated small things. So like now I'll get a coffee and go out the back door, and then I might grab a hose and start watering the garden another day. Yeah. They're tiny little things, but the difference it has on my outlook for the world is enormous, and it gets me out of an online environment and that wedge of the world that's pretty toxic to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and such a small moment of choosing. Yeah.
Because I'm not sucked into the device yet. I've got that window of going, no, don't pick it up, quickly get outside before it sucks you in. Yeah.
I'm sure you're all familiar with Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning author and Holocaust survivor and psychoanalyst. And, if you're ever to look for a resource or a feeling of inspiration, like his book is a book of hopefulness. In it, he talks about his experience in a prisoner camp and what it was that got him through. And what he observed was that when despair arrived for a person in the camp, when a person was overtaken with despair, it was almost as though their life was over and their life would end. And he talks about what it is that got him through, and that hope is central to his survival. And we can see this in terms of the statistics around holding a hopefulness for medical patients, how integral hope is for our psychological well-being, that it buffers against so many things. It is a resource that we can create and that we can cultivate. And I just want to read a quote from Viktor Frankl that I think really exemplifies exactly what we're talking about here. In his book, he says, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way."
Beautiful.
So good. Well done, Victor.
Indeed.
And well done, Em.
Thank you.
That's the timing of this episode is just
stunning.
It's a great choice of topic, Em. Thank you so much. I feel like at a time where so many of us, as Josh was saying before, when you go online or watch the news or anything outside your community, really, it can feel quite hopeless. But you have so beautifully and articulately pointed out the ways we can discover hope in our life. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So good to have you back.
It's so great.
Oh.
The book is unstuck.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, there's a very good chance you'll love the Vulnerability Mail, our weekly newsletter to help you remain imperfect. Each week, we'll send you one vulnerable question inspired by the current episode to help you unpack your own imperfect life. Subscribe at www.theimperfects.com.au.